You've spent your whole life trying to be a good person. You expected the universe to reward your effort, your right choices, and your quiet dedication. And yet you watch shady people thriving while you struggle just to keep your dignity. The system doesn't work on merit. There's no cosmic scale weighing your virtues. What exists is an impersonal mechanism. Whatever you genuinely feel yourself to be, in those layers where masks don't work, is shaping every circumstance in your life. If you're so deserving, why don't the results reflect that? Because the universe doesn't respond to what you do. It responds to what you assume you are. The future exists in multiple versions. Your internal state determines which one you'll encounter. Until you look at how this actually works, you'll keep blaming the world for the reflection you're projecting onto yourself.
The universe doesn't distinguish between the deserving and the undeserving. It doesn't evaluate character. It doesn't tally up effort. It doesn't reward virtue or punish transgression. This flies in the face of everything you've been told, centuries of religious teaching, and the cozy story that cosmic forces reward the good and punish the wicked. But look around. The pattern is different. Shady people prosper, while others, people of genuine integrity, face constant obstacles. If there were a system of moral payback governing the cosmos, this wouldn't happen. What does exist are impersonal laws of manifestation, laws that work with cold precision, indifferent to human judgments about good and evil. The universe manifests whatever it finds in consciousness, nothing more and nothing less. Neville Goddard, in his 1949 work titled Out of This World, explains how these laws operate, starting from something that mainstream science still can't explain: premonition. If it's possible to see an event before its physical occurrence, and history, clinical records, and countless personal experiences back this up, then that event already exists somewhere. Perceiving something that doesn't exist is logically impossible. Seeing a future event in advance demonstrates that this event is already formed, just waiting for the necessary shift in time to emerge on the three-dimensional plane. Think about what this means. The future isn't being built right now, moment by moment, as our ordinary perception suggests. It already exists, complete, detailed, in a dimension that the five senses can't reach, but that consciousness, under certain conditions, can access. Goddard establishes that earthly life follows a plan that resides in another dimension and slowly crosses through three-dimensional space. What we call the present corresponds only to the slice of time that ordinary perception can capture. But the totality of time, past, present, and all possible futures, exists all at once on a higher dimensional plane. So the inevitable question arises: does this mean absolute determinism? Is freedom just an illusion within a predetermined script? Here's how the paradox resolves. The future, although prepared in fine detail, doesn't have just one outcome. It has multiple outcomes. The temporal structure isn't a straight line with a fixed destination, but rather a system of tracks that continuously branch off. Each fork represents a concrete possibility, as substantial as all the others. And what determines which track will be traveled isn't chance, isn't accumulated merit, isn't the intervention of some external deity. It's the state of consciousness of the individual themselves. We operate through two completely different ways of seeing. The natural focus stays locked on the physical senses and the present moment. From this limited view, the past is memory and the future is speculation, just ideas with no weight. People who only work in this mode take what their senses tell them as the final word and treat solid matter as the only real thing. The spiritual focus operates at a completely different perceptual frequency. For those who access this expanded perspective, temporal content reveals itself as a present totality. Past and future abandon their status as abstractions and acquire solidity equivalent to that which physical objects have for the natural focus. What seems imaginary becomes palpable. What appears inaccessible reveals itself as available. The inability to perceive the future doesn't indicate its non-existence. It indicates a limitation of the perceptual apparatus. And this limitation isn't a birth defect. It comes from lifelong programming. From the earliest years, we're trained to accept as real only what we can see, touch, hear, smell, or taste. Decades of sensory experience lock this programming into a perceptual prison that few identify and even fewer manage to break out of. Goddard prescribes the deliberate development of a specific faculty, the ability to perceive the invisible. This doesn't happen on its own. It takes real discipline. The mind needs to be freed from sensory evidence. Attention must be fixed with unwavering persistence on an invisible state until it acquires clarity and density, until it presents itself as more real than the surrounding physical environment. Sustained concentration in a single direction automatically excludes other sensory impressions. When attention is fixed with sufficient intensity on an internal object, the external environment gradually dissolves from perception, not because it objectively ceases to exist, but because the dimensional focus has shifted. Modifying the future doesn't happen at the level of physical action. No amount of muscular effort, elaborate strategy, or manipulation of external circumstances can alter the dimensional trajectory. The alteration occurs exclusively on the plane of consciousness. By elevating your perspective to the fourth dimension, the domain where time exists as navigable space, each present moment reveals the possibility of selecting which among the multiple futures will be experienced. The universe doesn't ask about worthiness, it just manifests whatever consciousness selects. This selection, for the vast majority, occurs unconsciously and automatically. But for those who understand the mechanism, it becomes a deliberate act of creation. What internal structure functions as the selector of futures? What element of the psyche determines which fork will be followed? The answer lies in what Goddard identifies as the cornerstone of all human experience. There's an internal element that determines what happens in each person's life. It's not external circumstances. It's not where you were born, what education you received, or which opportunities came your way. The determining element is how each person perceives themselves, what they genuinely feel themselves to be when all social masks fall away. Goddard calls this the self-concept and zeroes in on this in Out of This World. It's simple. A person's external reality reflects their internal reality. Those who feel like failures attract and produce failures. Those who feel prosperous attract and produce prosperity, not as punishment or reward, but as a reflection. It works like this. Someone who internally sees themselves as a person who can never hold on to money will make poor financial decisions without realizing it. They'll spend when they should save. They'll avoid opportunities for gain because those aren't for people like me. They'll trust the wrong people. When the money disappears, they'll confirm their original belief. I knew it. I can never hold on to anything. What this person doesn't realize is that their own self-image guided every small choice that led to the result. The same principle operates in the opposite direction. Those who perceive themselves as someone who always finds solutions act differently when facing problems. They don't freeze up. They look for alternatives. They talk to people who can help. They try paths that others would dismiss. When the solution appears, observers say, "How lucky." It wasn't luck. It was the reflection of an internal identity that refuses to accept a dead end as destiny. Goddard states that altering this internal identity alters the future. Not gradually, not partially, directly. A person who genuinely changes how they perceive themselves changes what's going to happen to them. The future that was prepared for the old identity is no longer the path. Another future, compatible with the new self-perception, takes its place. The assumptions someone carries about themselves have real power. I'm not cut out for this. People like me don't achieve that. That's not for me. These internal phrases aren't just thoughts. They're instructions that direct behavior, perception, and choices. Each of these assumptions produces results compatible with it. That's why Goddard insists on revising these beliefs. Identifying what you assume about yourself is the first step toward changing what happens to you. Desire enters this system like a compass. Goddard describes it as the force that drives all human action. Nobody does anything without wanting something, even if that wanting is just to avoid discomfort. The desires that persist, that keep coming back even when we try to ignore them, that don't fade away with distractions, these desires indicate real possibilities. They're signs of something that can become concrete, not empty fantasies. Ignoring these calls blocks pathways. Answering them opens doors. The method for transforming desire into reality requires a specific step, assuming the feeling of already having what you desire. But you have to get this right. It doesn't mean imagining your desire coming true in the future, like someone watching a movie of something that's still going to happen. It doesn't mean repeating positive phrases, hoping that repetition will change something. It doesn't mean increasing the intensity of wanting. It means feeling now what you would feel if you had already achieved what you want. If the desire is financial, feel the peace of mind of someone who already has financial security. If it's a relationship, feel the completeness of someone already living that connection. If it's health, feel the vitality of someone who's already healthy. Don't pretend, don't make believe. Actually live in that feeling. When this happens, something shifts. Goddard describes that your broader self, the one that exists beyond the perception of the five senses, receives this new state as an instruction and begins organizing the means for its realization. The how doesn't need to be figured out by the conscious mind. The end that's assumed internally generates the pathways to make it concrete. Worrying about the how before firmly establishing the what interferes with the process. The difficulty lies in maintaining this internal state when everything around you shows the opposite. Your eyes see the empty bank account, the sick body, the loneliness. The method asks you to sustain an internal state different from what the senses are witnessing. This conflict is the only real obstacle. Those who can keep the internal feeling stable, regardless of the external evidence, cross the barrier between desire and realization. The practice of treating what doesn't yet exist as if it already exists transforms the individual's position. Instead of reacting to circumstances, they start producing them. Instead of being an effect, they become a cause. This understanding, however, remains theoretical without a concrete method of application. There's a specific technique that makes this work, and it uses a particular state of consciousness as its starting point. Goddard describes in Out of This World a precise method for imprinting desires onto reality. This isn't ordinary visualization, positive thinking, or repeating affirmations. The technique works in a specific state of mind and follows clear steps that, when done right, produce results in the physical world. The first step is knowing exactly what you want. It seems obvious, but most people carry around vague, contradictory desires, or desires borrowed from others. I want to be happy doesn't work. I want to be successful doesn't work. I want a better life doesn't work. Too vague, won't work. The desire needs to have a defined shape. A person who wants a specific job needs to know which job. Someone who wants a relationship needs to know what kind of relationship. Those who want health need to identify what being healthy means in their particular case. Imprecision in the desire generates imprecision in the result. Goddard insists on this point because the technique works with exactness. What you put into it is what you get out of it. Putting in something vague produces something vague. The second step involves constructing a specific mental scene. Not just any scene, a scene that could only happen after the desire has already been fulfilled. If the goal is to get a promotion at work, the scene isn't the moment of receiving the news. The scene is something that would happen afterward, a friend congratulating you on the achievement, the first day in the new position, or signing a contract with the new salary. The scene needs to imply that the realization has already occurred. Here's another key piece. Your own action should be central to the scene. It's not enough to imagine other people doing something for you. It's not enough to passively watch a favorable scenario. The scene needs to include you acting, participating, doing something that confirms the realization. If it's a new house, you're opening the door of that house, feeling the key in your hand. If it's a marriage, you're putting on the ring or hearing your partner say specific words. Active participation in the imagined scene makes a difference in the result. The third step, and here's the core of the technique, involves the physical state in which the scene will be imagined. Goddard specifies the body needs to be still, relaxed, in a state between waking and sleeping. Not too awake because the critical mind interferes. Not too asleep because you lose control of your thoughts. The exact point is that drowsiness that precedes sleep, when the body already feels heavy, the muscles have already let go, but there's still enough consciousness to direct your thinking. This state has a technical name, hypnagogia. It's the transition period between being awake and being asleep. In it, the mind works differently. The usual pushback from your critical mind fades. The imagination gets sharper than it ever is when you're fully awake. Mental images take on an almost sensory quality. Why this specific state? Because in it, the barrier between what Goddard calls the three-dimensional world and the four-dimensional world becomes permeable. Consciousness that's still directed can imprint images directly in the dimension where experience is organized. During the day, while awake, there's too much interference. In deep sleep, there's no direction. In the intermediate state, the two conditions combine. The fourth step is where most people fail. There's a difference between visualizing a scene and feeling yourself inside it. Visualizing is seeing the scene like someone watching a movie, images in front of you, separate from the observer. Feeling yourself inside is being in the scene, seeing with your own eyes, touching with your own hands, and hearing with your own ears. The difference seems subtle, but it's decisive. Goddard is emphatic. Imagining yourself doing something is completely different from imagining that you are doing something. In the first case, you see yourself from the outside, a figure on a mental screen. In the second, you see from the inside, experiencing the scene in the first person. Only the second produces results. If the scene involves shaking someone's hand, you need to feel the texture of the skin, the pressure of the fingers, and the movement of the arm. If it involves hearing words, you need to hear the tone of voice, the direction of the sound, and the resonance in the environment. If it involves a specific place, you need to feel the floor beneath your feet, the temperature of the air, and the objects around you. The scene should have sensory reality, not just visual. The fifth step is repetition. The constructed scene, felt in the first person, in the state of controlled drowsiness, should be repeated. Not once, not twice. Repeated until it acquires solidity, until it seems as real as any memory of something that actually happened. If attention wanders, and it will wander, bring it back to the scene, gently, without frustration, as many times as necessary. Repetition does something specific. It engraves. Just as a trail in the grass is formed by repeated walking, the mental scene deepens in consciousness through repeated imagining. When the engraving reaches a certain depth, something happens. The scene stops being a mental fabrication and starts being recognized as real by the internal system that organizes experience. Goddard instructs that the practice be maintained until falling asleep or until a specific feeling of completeness arises, as if the thing were already done, guaranteed, with no need to continue. This feeling indicates that the impression has been registered in the fourth dimension. From this point on, the internal work is complete. The means for physical realization begin to organize themselves, regardless of additional effort. Keeping your body still isn't just a side note. A motionless body releases the energy that normally goes toward movement and staying alert. This energy becomes available for imaginative activity. Additionally, stillness signals to the nervous system that there's no immediate danger, allowing altered states of consciousness to settle in without triggering internal alarms. What happens afterward? Goddard describes that the scene imprinted in the fourth dimension manifests in the third dimension through paths that are often unexpected. The person who imprints a scene of promotion doesn't need to know how the promotion is going to happen. It might come from an unexpected invitation, from a change in the company, or from an opportunity somewhere else. The how isn't the problem of the person practicing the technique, it's the work of the dimensional structure that was activated. This technique works because it operates at a level of reality that precedes physical manifestation. To understand why this is possible, it's necessary to understand how time and space function in the higher dimensions.
The big problem was never a lack of method. Information exists in abundance. What's missing is the ability to sustain an internal state in the face of contrary evidence from the senses. The human mind has been trained for decades to obey the testimony of the eyes, the ears, and the touch. The moment someone closes their eyes and tries to inhabit the feeling of a fulfilled desire, an automatic resistance arises, and it's almost like an internal insult. This isn't real, and the person opens their eyes, relieved to return to the familiar. The technique doesn't require special talent. It requires something rarer, the willingness to maintain long enough what hasn't yet appeared in the physical world. Most people prefer the familiar prison to the freedom that demands discipline.
The technique of imprinting desires through the state of controlled drowsiness works because it operates at a level of reality that ordinary perception doesn't reach. To understand why mental images can alter physical circumstances, it's necessary to understand how time really works, not as the senses present it, but as it exists in its complete structure. The initial observation is simple. If someone can see an event before it happens, that event already exists somewhere. Premonition, something documented across every culture and time period, is only possible if the future is already formed. You cannot perceive what doesn't exist. The conclusion is obvious. The future isn't being created now. It's already there, waiting to be reached. This transforms time into something similar to space. Just as a distant city exists now, even if you're not in it, future events exist now, even if you haven't reached them yet. The difference is that the city is separated from you by miles of space. The future is separated by something that works the same way, a distance that isn't spatial in the ordinary sense, but dimensional. An analogy helps to visualize this. Imagine a cube, a solid object with height, width, and depth. If you cut through this cube, the cut reveals a flat surface, a square. This square has only two dimensions, height and width. The depth has disappeared. Now cut through that square. The cut reveals a line which has only one dimension, length. Cut the line, and what's left is a point which has no dimensions at all. The point is a section of the line is a section of the surface is a section of the solid. Each lower level is a cut, a slice, a reduced version of the higher level. The same logic applies to time. The objects we see, people, things, events, are three-dimensional sections of four-dimensional realities. What appears to the senses is a momentary slice of something much larger. Just as the square is merely a section of the cube, the present moment is merely a section of a complete temporal structure that includes both past and future. Time, in this understanding, is the fourth dimension, not some abstract idea, but a real direction in which things extend. Just as a table has height, width, and depth, it also has duration. It exists through time, from the moment it was manufactured until the moment it will be destroyed. This temporal extension is as real as spatial extension. The senses just can't perceive it all at once. The human being you encounter on the street is a section. The complete person, from birth to death, with all their experiences, all their versions, all their possibilities, exists as a whole in the fourth dimension. What you see is a cross-section, a snapshot of something much more extensive. The same applies to you. The you that's listening to this right now is a slice. The complete version includes who you were, who you will be, and all the paths you could follow. This larger structure is the four-dimensional self. It's not visible to the physical eyes because the eyes only capture three-dimensional sections, but it exists, containing the entire span of life as a simultaneous present. The structure of reality works like a serial universe. Each level is a section of a higher level, going further than the ordinary mind can grasp. The three-dimensional world we consider solid and definitive is, in truth, a shadow of something more fundamental. And that something more fundamental is, in turn, a shadow of yet another, larger level. Reality unfolds in layers, each one containing and transcending the one before. The ability to alter the future depends on accessing these higher levels. At the three-dimensional level, where the senses operate, events seem fixed, determined, and inevitable. But this is an illusion of perspective, like someone inside a train thinking that the tracks ahead are the only possible path, without noticing the branching points that exist further along. When consciousness rises to the fourth dimension, through the state of controlled drowsiness, or through other means that produce the same shift, the perspective changes. What seemed like a fixed future reveals itself as a set of possibilities. What seemed like an inevitable destiny shows itself to be one among several available tracks. From this expanded perspective, selection becomes possible. The process works like this. By withdrawing attention from the physical world and concentrating it intensely on a specific internal state, the three-dimensional environment loses its sharpness. It doesn't disappear, it continues to exist, but it stops dominating perception. At that moment, consciousness awakens in a dimensionally larger world, where what was merely imagination takes on the quality of concrete reality. This explains why the state between waking and sleep is so important. In this state, fixation on sensory data naturally diminishes. The motionless body stops sending constant signals. The mind, less occupied with processing the immediate physical environment, becomes free to move dimensionally. The distinction between objective and subjective, between real and imaginary, between external and internal, these divisions that seem absolute in the ordinary waking state, reveal themselves as products of dimensional focus. The solidity of the physical world isn't baked into reality itself. It's a consequence of where attention is fixed. Change the focus, and the solidity changes with it. But if reality can be altered by internal change, what happens to the truth? Isn't assuming something internally that the senses deny simply self-deception? The common definition of truth might be inverted. The common definition of truth requires that a statement correspond to observable facts. Something is true if it matches what the senses witness. Something is false if it contradicts external evidence. This definition seems so obvious, so unquestionable, that challenging it sounds absurd. But it's precisely this definition that keeps people trapped in the circumstances they want to change. If truth is only what corresponds to the current state of things, then any attempt to change that state starts with a lie. Someone who's sick and internally assumes health is lying. Someone who's poor and internally assumes abundance is fooling themselves. Someone who's alone and internally assumes connection is escaping reality. The standard definition of truth turns every internal change into self-deception, and that's exactly how it keeps nothing from changing. The dimensional view of reality flips this on its head. If the future already exists in multiple versions, and if the internal state determines which version will be experienced, then assuming a state that hasn't yet manifested physically isn't a lie. It's selection. It's choosing which future to encounter. The lie would be accepting as definitive something that's merely one of the available possibilities. Judging by appearances, accepting the testimony of the senses as the final truth, is like looking at a photograph and declaring that the person pictured can never change, because the photo shows how they really are. The photo is a momentary record. The person is a being in motion, with countless possible versions ahead. Treating the present moment as absolute truth makes the same mistake. It freezes as definitive something that's in flux. The idea of denying what your senses show you appears in ancient traditions in different forms. It's not about pretending that the senses don't exist or ignoring real dangers. It's about refusing the tyranny of the apparent over the possible. The senses show what is now. Imagination can access what can be. Giving the senses absolute authority over the imagination is flipping the dimensional order upside down. It's letting the shadow boss around the thing that casts it. If you maintain a perception about someone, a friend, a family member, a colleague, that doesn't elevate them, that doesn't free them from limitations, that perception isn't the truth. It's a prison. Even if all the apparent facts confirm your negative view, that view doesn't correspond to the complete person, only to the section you chose to fixate on. The four-dimensional person contains versions that your eyes aren't seeing. Maintaining the limited view isn't being realistic. It's actively locking that limitation into place. The same principle applies to yourself. The image you sustain about who you are determines which versions of you can manifest. A limited self-image functions as a filter that blocks possibilities incompatible with it. Not because those possibilities don't exist, they do exist in the four-dimensional structure, but because the filter of identity prevents access to them. Imagination isn't fantasy disconnected from reality. Imagination is the very instrument of dimensional navigation. The world as imagination sees it isn't an illusion. It's the real world of a dimensional level that the physical senses don't reach. When someone imagines with intensity and persistence a specific state, they're not daydreaming. They're operating in the dimension where experience is organized before it appears on the physical plane. Consciousness doesn't perceive in the same way that the senses perceive. The senses capture surfaces, appearances, and momentary configurations. Consciousness can access deeper structures, what traditions called seeing the heart, instead of seeing the face. The face changes according to angle and lighting. The heart, the sustained internal conception, determines which faces will be possible. Intense meditation, the state of focused concentration described in the waking dream technique, gives the mind a magnetic quality. This isn't poetic language. Concentrated attention functions as an organizing force that attracts elements compatible with the sustained state. Mental dispersion produces dispersed results. Sustained focus produces results aligned with the object of focus. Desire and imagination function as instruments of creation, not as requests sent to an external force, but as acts of selection within the field of possibilities that already exist. Desire identifies the direction. Imagination sustained in the feeling of fulfillment selects the specific path. The combination of both, clear desire plus vivid imagination of completion, operates as a mechanism of dimensional navigation. Faith, in this context, isn't belief in something improbable. It's the ability to sustain an internal state regardless of what the senses present. The ancient definition nails it. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's not hoping that something will happen. It's internally experiencing the substance of what hasn't yet appeared in the physical world. It's having as evidence something that the eyes don't confirm. Calling things that are not as though they were, this practice produces results because it operates in the dimension where being and not being are questions of focus, not of absolute existence. All possibilities exist. What we call not being is simply a possibility that hasn't yet received the focus necessary to manifest on the three-dimensional plane. Treating it as if it already were is directing it toward manifestation. The practice asks for something your everyday mind fights against, staying true to the assumed state even when everything around seems to deny it. The senses will keep showing the old reality while the new one is being organized. The interval between assuming the state and seeing its physical manifestation is the testing period. Those who abandon the internal state because the external evidence hasn't changed yet interrupt the process before completion. Those who sustain the state cross the interval and find the manifestation on the other side. Consciousness is the only reality that doesn't depend on anything else to exist. Everything else, objects, events, circumstances, and relationships, is a configuration within consciousness. Modifying consciousness modifies its configurations. This isn't just theory, it's how all human experience actually works. But if all change begins internally, what happens to the outer world? If each person creates their own reality through their internal state, how do individual realities interact? The answer lies in the mirror principle, and in the discovery that there's no one to change but yourself.
There's a dangerous pride in being realistic, in facing the facts, in not fooling yourself. And this pride functions as a dimensional anchor. Every time someone looks at their own situation and declares, "This is what I am," they're issuing an instruction. The senses show only what has already crystallized, never what can crystallize. Loyalty to the current state of things builds the future state of things. What's called honesty is, many times, blind obedience to what has already manifested. Change requires something that feels like betrayal, abandoning the testimony of the eyes in favor of an internal state that nothing external yet confirms.
There's no one to change but yourself. This statement seems limiting at first glance, as if it reduced the power of action to your own navel. But it contains the key to all genuine transformation. The outer world functions as a mirror. It reflects, with absolute precision, the inner arrangement of whoever observes it. Trying to modify external circumstances without first transforming the internal state is like standing in front of a mirror, trying to change the reflection without changing your face. You can yell at the reflection, negotiate with it, beg it to change. The reflection will keep showing exactly what's in front of it. The only way to alter what appears in the mirror is to alter what the mirror is reflecting. Relationships work this way, conflicts work this way, opportunities work this way, limitations work this way. Everything that appears in a person's experience moves in harmony with the concept that person sustains internally. Not sometimes, not in most cases, always. Someone who internally carries the conviction that they're not respected will find disrespect everywhere. Not because the world is conspiring against them, but because their perception will filter events in a way that confirms the belief. Neutral gestures will be interpreted as offenses. Opportunities for genuine connection will go unnoticed. And each confirmation will reinforce the original belief, creating a cycle that seems to prove that the world is just like that. The cycle only breaks from the inside. Modifying the internal conviction, genuinely, not as a superficial exercise in positive thinking, modifies what the mirror can reflect. The same external situations begin to be perceived differently. New situations, compatible with the new state, start to appear. The world didn't change, the observer changed. And since the world is a mirror of the observer, the reflection is adjusted. There's an ancient passage about a pool called Bethesda, where sick people waited for the stirring of the waters to be healed. The common interpretation sees this as an external miracle, a force from outside healing those who waited. The dimensional reading sees something different. The healing already existed as a possibility in the four-dimensional structure of each person. What was missing was the internal perception of that perfection. When someone managed to sustain internally the image of themselves as healed, to feel healed before any external evidence, the healing manifested. The pool was a symbol, not a cause. The cause was in the change of self-perception. This principle also comes with a serious warning about the power of intense emotions. Emotions aren't passive byproducts of experience. They're active forces that reorganize the mental structure and, by extension, future experience. Hatred, in particular, possesses transformative power as potent as love, only in the opposite direction. When someone intensely hates another person, something happens internally. The mind fixates on the negative qualities perceived in the other. The imagination feeds these qualities, expands them, and makes them vivid. Hour after hour, day after day, the person who hates is sustaining in their imagination a detailed image of what they despise. An imagination doesn't distinguish between self and other. Whatever it sustains with intensity, it imprints. The result is precise and terrible. Those who hate end up embodying the characteristics they imagine in the one they hate. The person descends to the level of what they fight. They gradually become what they most despise. Prolonged conflicts, personal, familial, political, and national, show this at scale. After years of war, both sides often resemble each other more than they'd like to admit. Each one has transformed into the image they sustained of the enemy. The only way to bring perfection to the world is through the transformation of your own self. Not through combat against evil, not through crusades against what's wrong, not through constant indignation at injustices. These reactions, however justified they may seem, fix attention on what you want to eliminate, and thus guarantee its perpetuation. The alternative isn't passivity or indifference, it's elevation. It's moving consciousness to a state where the evil you were fighting ceases to exist as a dominant reality. This doesn't mean pretending that problems don't exist. It means refusing to give them the power of sustained attention. It means investing imaginative energy in the vision of what you want to see, not in the fight against what you want to eliminate. Internally assuming nobility, integrity, and fulfillment changes what the mirror can show. The outer world, which is nothing but a reflection, dissolves its current form and reorganizes to correspond to the new internal affirmation. This doesn't happen through instant magic. It happens through the same dimensional mechanics behind all manifestation. The internal state selects which among the multiple futures will be experienced. So the responsibility is completely yours. There's no external force to blame. There's no real enemy to fight. There's no circumstance that possesses its own power over the experience of those who understand this mechanism. Salvation, if we want to use that ancient term, depends exclusively on the ability to discipline the imagination and sustain the desired state. The universe doesn't ask if you deserve it. It doesn't evaluate your history, your mistakes, or your qualifications. It manifests whatever it finds in your consciousness. Good people aren't automatically rewarded. Shady people aren't automatically punished. The system doesn't operate by moral merit. It operates by dimensional correspondence. What's inside appears outside, always. This places the power and the responsibility exactly where they've always been. In you, not as a burden, but as liberation. If the world is a mirror, you're not at its mercy. You're the cause of it. Change the cause, and the effect adjusts. All change begins with understanding your role as a co-creator, and the only way to connect with this divine intelligence is through meditation. We've developed a set of audio tools to help you access this elevated state of consciousness. To learn more and get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video made sense to you, write in the comments, "Made sense to me."